You stayed silent when they crossed the line. You gave them second chances. You chose grace over confrontation. Not because you were afraid, but because you believed in decency. You believed in redemption. But all they saw was opportunity. They took what you gave and asked for more. They mistook your patience for permission. And now you're here empty, exhausted, and asking yourself, was I too soft? Or were they too cruel? This video is not about revenge. It's about reality. A Machiavellian truth: no one teaches you when kindness fails, cruelty becomes necessary. Not to hurt others, but to protect yourself, to restore order, to reclaim power in a world that doesn't reward good intentions. It punishes them. So if you're tired of being the one who gets walked over, talked down to, or quietly forgotten, this is for you. It's time to stop explaining your worth. It's time to stop forgiving what's unforgivable. And above all, it's time to master the art of necessary cruelty, because the most dangerous person in the room is the one who was kind until they weren't. They told you kindness was a virtue, that if you were patient, forgiving, and understanding, the world would eventually mirror your grace. So you bit your tongue when someone crossed the line. You gave second chances when apologies felt empty. You stayed silent, not because you didn't see what they did, but because you hoped they'd see it themselves. But here's the truth. No one wants to say out loud in a world that rewards dominance. Kindness without boundaries isn't seen as noble. It's seen as weakness. People don't respect kindness they didn't earn. In fact, the more freely you give it, the less valuable it becomes in their eyes. The quiet patience you believed was maturity. They see it as a green light. The benefit of the doubt you gave them. They take it as permission. And slowly, you become the person everyone tests because they know you won't push back. Not yet. This is the first betrayal of the kind-hearted. They assume others operate from the same moral compass. But Machiavelli was clear: most people don't fear doing wrong. They fear consequences. Without clear limits, even good people begin to overstep. Not because they're evil, but because human nature gravitates toward what's easy, and exploiting the kind is easy. It doesn't provoke resistance. It doesn't demand accountability. It simply absorbs and bleeds in silence. Kindness without structure becomes a slow erosion of self-respect. And the longer you wait for others to realize your value, the more invisible you become. Because in the harsh reality of power dynamics, kindness that isn't balanced with consequence is misinterpreted. It's not seen as strength, it's seen as submission. So the solution isn't to stop being kind. It's to make your kindness a choice, not an obligation. Let it be earned, not assumed. Respect flows toward those who guard their energy. And if you want people to treat you differently, it starts with this. The first time someone shows you disrespect, don't explain it away, correct it. Because what you allow is what continues. And in a world that watches more than it listens, silence isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just the opening act to your own erasure. There comes a point when kindness no longer works, when your patience becomes your prison and your silence is mistaken for surrender. In that moment, you're faced with a choice that feels impossible. Either keep absorbing the blows of other people's disrespect, or become the very thing they never thought you could be: cold, strategic, and capable of cruelty. But let's be clear, this isn't about revenge. It's not about hurting someone back, just to feel better. This is war, but it's psychological, not emotional. Machiavelli called it necessary cruelty, a calculated response when every soft measure has failed. It is not impulsive. It is not chaotic. It is a precise surgical strike meant to shift the balance of power, not unleash your rage. Emotional revenge screams. Necessary cruelty whispers. It moves quietly without warning and leaves behind no blood, but all the damage. The purpose of cruelty, when done right, is containment. It stops the bleeding. It ends the pattern. It's the act that tells the world you pushed too far, and this is where it ends. There's no tantrum, no dramatic speech, no public explosion. Instead, you become quieter, colder, and utterly detached. The very absence of warmth becomes the punishment. It teaches more than any outburst ever could. This kind of cruelty is not driven by hatred. It's born out of clarity. The realization that protecting your peace will sometimes require you to burn a bridge and never explain why. You don't do it to make them suffer. You do it to ensure they never try it again. It's how power is reclaimed after being taken for granted. And the greatest power lies in not needing them to understand it. People expect you to beg to talk, to give closure, but necessary cruelty denies them all of that. It forces them to sit with their guilt, to face the silence they created, and to realize too late that the version of you they abused no longer exists. This isn't revenge. This is transformation. And once you deliver it without emotion, without apology, you become someone no one dares to push again. Because now they know if this is how you act when kindness ends, they'll never want to see what happens when mercy dies too. There's a fatal mistake people make when they finally decide to stop being kind. They hesitate. They deliver consequences in fragments, hoping the other person gets the message, but leaving the door cracked open. And in that hesitation, their power dissolves. Machiavelli warned us clearly. If you must harm someone, do it in such a way that you need not fear their revenge. In other words, don't play with cruelty. Commit to it. Fully. Make it sharp, final, and beyond repair. Why? Because lingering cruelty like slow poison only breeds chaos. The person on the receiving end doesn't learn from uncertainty. They exploit it. They test your mood, wait for your forgiveness, circle back with just enough charm to reopen old wounds. But if you respond with clean, cold precision, a swift exit, a total emotional cutoff. No explanation. It creates a shock they never recover from. It doesn't provoke war. It ends it before it starts. People don't fear a person who punishes slowly. They fear someone who enforces boundaries like a guillotine once, and it's done. And that's the true brilliance of necessary cruelty. It doesn't just send a message to the offender. It sends a message to the room. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to announce anything. All you need is one irreversible act that shifts the dynamic forever. One decision that says you crossed a line and there is no return. The ones who master this move are never questioned twice. They are seen as composed, unshakable, and unapproachable in the best way. Their silence is louder than confrontation. Their absence cuts deeper than presence. And most importantly, they never revisit the punishment. No second guessing, no softening. No. Maybe we can talk again someday. Because finality is what gives cruelty its sting. If your goal is to reclaim respect, to reset the terms of your presence, then make the strike clean. Make it unforgettable. And when people wonder what happened, just say, I moved differently. Because in a world full of endless explanations and weak boundaries, true power belongs to the one who cuts once and never looks back. Not all punishment needs to be loud. In fact, the most devastating response to disrespect isn't a scream or a rant. It's a sudden shift in presence. When someone crosses a line and expects a fight, give them silence. When they look for confrontation, offer stillness. Because nothing unnerves a person more than being locked out of the emotional space they used to control without warning, without explanation. That's when cruelty becomes its most elegant form, detachment wrapped in ambiguity. Machiavelli understood this deeply. People aren't haunted by what you say. They're haunted by what you don't say. By what you used to give them freely, laughter, warmth, softness, and now withhold without reason. The uncertainty drives them mad. Because humans are addicted to emotional clarity. We want answers. We want resolution. We want to know where we stand. So when you go cold without warning, when your eyes lose their warmth and your tone sharpens with no visible anger, you've taken the control back. This isn't passive aggression. It's psychological warfare. And the genius of it is that it doesn't require force. It requires restraint. People expect you to explain what they did wrong. But in doing so, they want to regain narrative control. They want the chance to apologize, defend, or spin the story. But when you deny them that, when you let them sit in the silence of their own actions, you become untouchable. Not because you're cruel, but because you're unreadable. and the unreadable are always feared. Silence becomes the mirror they can't look away from. Ambiguity becomes the punishment they can't escape. They'll replay every interaction, question every detail, wonder what moment caused the shift, and that loop becomes their consequence. You don't need to say, "You hurt me." Your absence says it louder, and more importantly, it lasts longer. So next time someone disrespects you, don't announce your exit. Just disappear emotionally. Go colder, shorter, sharper. Let them feel the void. Because when kindness fails and cruelty begins, the most powerful move isn't to fight, it's to vanish in plain sight. Let the silence burn where your voice used to comfort. That's not weakness. That's power disguised as stillness, and it echoes longer than any words ever could. You may know who you are, kind, patient, loyal to a fault, but in the real world, that inner truth means nothing if it's not backed by how people perceive you. And perception, unlike character, isn't shaped by your intentions. It's shaped by what you tolerate. You could have the strongest values in private, but if the world sees you accept disrespect without consequence, they will rewrite your identity for you, not as someone strong, but as someone safe to ignore. Machiavelli warned, "Men judge more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see, but few can feel." That's the brutal truth. People won't remember your good heart. They'll remember how others treated you in public. They'll watch how you let yourself be interrupted, dismissed, laughed at, walked over. And without you saying a word, they'll decide you're not someone who bites back. You've taught them that your boundaries are optional, that your silence is approval, that your presence can be challenged without cost. In a world built on social dynamics, this is how respect is quietly stolen. Not in big betrayals, but in 100 subtle moments of erosion. The jokes that cut deeper than they should, the way your input is talked over the mimicry of your ideas. You think letting it slide makes you the bigger person, but they think it means you're not big enough to stand your ground. If people see that there are no consequences for crossing you, they won't stop out of empathy. They'll stop only when it's no longer comfortable. And that's why reputation isn't about being feared like a tyrant. It's about being undeniable. When you walk into a room, the energy should shift, not because you demand attention, but because people know this is not someone you test twice. So stop explaining. Stop defending your image. Doesn't need justification. It needs consistency. Be the person who's hard to read, impossible to disrespect, and silent when others expect noise. Let your restraint speak for your strength. Because in the end, the world won't remember what you allowed. They'll remember what you ended. There comes a point when you stop explaining yourself not out of spite, but out of evolution. When someone repeatedly crosses the line, when kindness is met with manipulation, and silence is mistaken for surrender, the shift isn't just necessary, it's inevitable. But the biggest trap people fall into after finally changing is the need to explain why. They feel guilt. They want to be understood. They want others to know that the coldness wasn't who they were. It was a reaction to betrayal. But here's the truth. If your shift requires a speech, you've already diluted its power. Machiavelli didn't believe in emotional closure. He believed in psychological finality. Once you draw a line, it's not your job to narrate what caused it. That's their work to do. And if you explain, if you open that door even an inch, what you're really doing is inviting negotiation. You're giving them the chance to rewrite the truth, to downplay their actions, to flip the script, and suddenly your justified withdrawal becomes a topic of debate. This is why you must learn to stand in your silence. Let your coldness speak. Let your absence echo. When they ask what happened, reply with composure. Nothing really, I just moved differently. That one sentence says everything and says nothing. It keeps the power in your hands and the questions in their mind. The truth is, the people who pushed you to that point already know what they did. They just want to see if you'll soften again, if you'll return to who you were. But Machiavelli warned, if you let someone believe you've returned to your old self, they'll return to the same behavior that destroyed it. That's why your evolution must be real, not an act. not a threat, but a new version of you that no longer needs validation. And no, you don't owe anyone balance, perspective, or closure. If they didn't care how they treated you when you were kind, they don't get access to the explanation behind your coldness. Now the shift is your boundary. The silence is your answer, and your refusal to explain. That's your final act of self-respect. When someone breaks your trust, the first impulse is often emotional revenge, to make them feel what they made you feel, to lash out, to scream, to make them regret the moment they underestimated you. But Machiavelli's wisdom cuts deeper than that. He didn't advocate for cruelty to satisfy pain. He believed in cruelty as a catalyst for rebirth. Because when kindness has failed and silence has been ignored, the coldest thing you can do isn't to punish, it's to evolve. This isn't about becoming bitter, it's about becoming different. The moment you withdraw, cut ties go quiet. Not as a reaction, but as a resolution. Something inside you changes. You no longer need to win them back. You no longer need to be understood. You rise from the betrayal not as the same version of yourself, but as someone stronger, sharper, more untouchable. Cruelty, when done with restraint and purpose, doesn't just end a connection, it ends the version of you that allowed it. That's the transformation. You stop checking your phone. You stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen. You stop caring if they regret it, because the version of you that would have needed that closure is gone. And in its place is someone who no longer begs to be seen, no longer apologizes for becoming harder. That's not heartlessness. That's growth through fire. The people who once had access to your softness will feel it. They'll notice that your eyes no longer hold the same light, that your presence isn't warm. It's calm, distant, unreadable. They'll sense they've been shut out of something they didn't value when it was theirs. And that's the true cruelty. Not in the pain you give, but in the peace you take away. This is what separates emotional outbursts from strategic transformation. One fades the other, rewrites the entire dynamic. Let them talk. Let them wonder. You don't owe them the old version of you. You don't owe them softness after they weaponized your kindness. You owe yourself evolution. Because the strongest cruelty is not what you do to them. It's who you become because of them. And once you've transformed, they'll never touch you the same way again if they ever get close enough to try. The most devastating punishment isn't loud. It isn't anger or revenge or a final confrontation. It's what comes after the silence. The space you once filled with warmth, attention, and presence now echoes with absence, and that emptiness becomes a mirror, one they're forced to stare into day after day, trying to understand when it all slipped away. This is where cruelty reaches its most powerful form, not through your words but through their own reflection. Machiavelli understood this well. The greatest consequence you can give someone isn't humiliation, it's loss. The kind of loss that can't be undone with apologies. The kind that lingers because it leaves questions unanswered. What did I do wrong? Was it me? Can I fix this? But you give them nothing. No closure, no confrontation. You don't feed their ego with a dramatic ending, you give them silence so sharp, it cuts deeper than any insult ever could. Because when you walk away without warning, without anger, without even looking back, you force them to become the narrator of their own downfall. And that voice in their head, the one that replays every moment, every ignored kindness, every crossed boundary that becomes your legacy, you don't punish them by destroying them. You punish them by making them sit with the version of themselves that destroyed you. They expected you to fight, to cry, to plead. Instead, you vanished. You didn't give them a scene, you gave them stillness. And now, even if they're surrounded by people, it's not the same. Because your presence had weight. It grounded them. It gave them more than they ever admitted. And now that gravity is gone, and they feel it in ways they can't explain. What haunts them isn't what you did, it's what you didn't do. You didn't curse them out. You didn't give them a final warning. You just changed. Coldly, completely, quietly. That's what leaves them spinning. And when they see you move on, lighter, sharper, more powerful. They'll realize the worst part of losing you wasn't the pain you inflicted. It was knowing they created the silence that replaced you, and now they have to live with it. In life, being kind is admirable, but being kind without limits is dangerous. If you're always giving, always forgiving, always explaining yourself to people who've already shown you disrespect, you're not being compassionate. You're being available to abuse. And in a world that often values power over principle, your silence doesn't earn respect, it creates assumptions. Assumptions that you'll never leave, never fight back, never draw the line. That's where the lesson comes in. You don't need to stop being kind. You need to start being strategic. Let your kindness be a choice, not a weakness. Let your patience have a breaking point. Because when someone repeatedly disrespects you and still expects access to your peace, it's not love anymore. It's control. And the most powerful thing you can do isn't to explain it, but to end it quietly. Cruelty, when necessary, isn't about hurting someone. It's about preserving yourself. It's about sending the message, I won't destroy you, but I will disappear, and you'll feel it. And that absence will teach more than any words ever could. So remember, forgiveness is noble, but repetition without consequence is permission. The next time someone crosses, you don't react emotionally. Respond strategically. Withdraw your energy. Hold your silence. Let the loss be the lesson. Because your peace should never be handed to those who prove they don't value it. If this message hit home, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us reach more minds ready to reclaim their power.